everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Crazy stuff to talk about today. So today, we're going to talk more about the Cold War, but how the details get kind of fuzzy. America tries to make the rules in the UN, and when they don't go according to the plan that America wanted, America tries to change the rules. Clearly going to upset Russia. This is actually going to play a pivotal part of a war that we're going to talk about today. Man, it gets wild today. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so today we're going to start in China because there's a very interesting situation that takes place after World War II in China that is going to have worldwide consequences very quickly. All right, so there's two guys here that you need to know. All right. These two guys are huge rivals. I was actually surprised to find a picture with them next to each other, but they had met quite a few times. So the two guys here on the left, and the picture here in orangish yellow, that's China, Mongolia, which is separate. For this course, we can put Mongolia and China together as one country. China's a very large country, triple the population of America. So what happens in China is really important. So two guys on the left here, all right, the guy on the left is a man named Chiang Kai Shek, all right. The man to his left, all right, that is Mao Zedong. Now, in class, I always have my students say Chiang Kai Shek and Mao Zedong. There's a handful of Asian names that are uncommon here in America. You don't hear real often. So saying them out loud helps you get familiar with them, but can't do that in this format. But you got Chiang Kai Shek on the left and Mao Zedong on the right. Both of these men want to run China. So let me tell you where that can get a little squirrely in this story. We're going to start here with Chiang Kai Shek. Chiang Kai Shek we'll start out here with this story and just say he's in charge in China. Now, here's the main thing you got to know about Chiang Kai Shek. He's not communist. Not communist. Now, he's nationalist. That's not the exact same thing as a democracy. There's other reasons America would have issues, but he's not communist. Since he is not communist and he doesn't like communists, at this point in the late 1940s, early 1950s, that's all it takes for America to like you. So we're like, we are Team Chiang Kai Shek because the other guy that's trying to gain power in China and take over is Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong is a communist. So America's like, we do not like this guy. China, 3 times the population of America. Absolutely, America does not want China to become communist. So what America does, all right, is we fund Chiang Kai Shek and give him tons of money. Okay, the Marshall Plan has worked fantastic in Europe. Surely if we just give the guy that's already in power a bunch of money to help out his people, he'll remain in power and we don't have to worry about this Mao Zedong guy. Well, the problem is, even though Chiang Kai Shek is anti-communist and we're like, yes, what a good guy, he's actually a trash ruler. Tons of corruption in his administration and his military. All this money we give him, he goes and builds a big gold palace and doesn't give it to the people. And so even though we try to fund him, it's not effective. Mao Zedong, on the other hand, the communist guy, actually gains a lot of support with the way they deal with property differently in China, basically like a redistribution. Basically, in a country that had a few amount of rich people that control everything and a lot of poor people, communism is a very positive concept for these people because it kind of evens the playing field. Mao Zedong actually does a lot of good stuff for the people in China. And he does appear to be a better leader than Chiang Kai Shek. And because of that, China decides to go with Mao Zedong, the communist. And Chiang Kai Shek, all right, he has to flee from China to a little island that China owns called Taiwan. All right. Sometimes it's called Formosa. I don't know why there's multiple names for it, but Chiang Kai Shek is going to flee to Taiwan, and Mao Zedong, the communist, is going to run China. So China is communist. Okay, story makes sense right there, right? All right, well, here's where it gets a little complicated. China is really important in the United Nations that we had talked about in a previous lesson. Remember, they're part of that UN Security Council, that permanent 5 people. Russia is already on that, and they're communist. Well, now it looks like since China has become communist, you have 2 of the 5 people on the UN Security Council that can declare war on somebody, be communist. Terrifies America. And so America says, ha ha ha, just kidding. All right, so here's how this is going to work, and how America has the pull to pull this off. I still don't know. They claim, even though Mao Zedong is communist and runs China, which is a communist country now, America says, wait a minute, since Mao Zedong didn't legally take over China, he's not actually the leader of China. The real leader of China is still Chiang Kai Shek, a dude who's not even allowed into mainland China. So America and the democracy says, this is who is actually the real leader of China. The guy that's against communists, the guy that's not even allowed inside the country. The reason that's important is because Chiang Kai Shek will actually represent China at the United Nations. Even though China is communist, the guy that represents them at the United Nations is anti-communist, which America likes. That plays a really pivotal role today as we get further into this story. But the question here is, how does Mao Zedong become the leader of China, even though Chiang Kai Shek had all of the American support? Like, how did that end up being a situation where, we just threw money at him? Why did Chiang Kai Shek not remain in charge? And we talked about that there on what his shortcomings were. So pause me, answer that completely. And we're moving on. All right. So this is going to sound like we're jumping around here in the story, but we're actually not. It's all going to come back together. All right. So we're going to start talking now about Korea. So I know we just got done talking about China, Mao Zedong, Chiang Kai Shek, this little side story, and now it looks like I'm jumping over to something completely different in Korea. And while, yes, these are 2 separate stories, they're going to come to a head here in a minute in our story. All right. So let me show you where Korea is. I'm specifically referring to Korea as Korea. Now, if you've never heard of any of this before, that's fine. I don't have to fix your preconceived knowledge. But I'm not saying North and South Korea. I'm just saying Korea. Because for most of the existence, almost all of its existence, Korea has been one country. So here's where Korea is. All right. So basically, to simplify this, all the yellow stuff here is China. All right. And this is a much older map, but I wanted to get one where Korea is just Korea. So Korea is here in orange. You can see it basically has China on the left, Japan on the right. This is where Korea exists on Earth. Now, Korea being in Asia, when World War II started, right? Early on in the war, and this is a picture of who owned what in 1940. This is before America even got involved. As soon as Japan started taking stuff over in World War II, one of the first places they took over was Korea. Because it's part of Asia, Japan wants to own everything Asia related in World War II. All right. So here's what ends up happening. All right. You got another map here. You got China. All right. You got Korea and you have Japan. So this is really important here. So World War II ends. Now, if you remember, Russia was going to help out America in the Pacific. They wanted to wait a while. But the motivating factor for Russia was the fact that they thought that they could get all this land that Japan owned after World War II. We didn't want to do that, but we didn't really want to talk about it. All right. Well, once America develops the atomic bomb, we dropped the atomic bomb in August of 1945. Russia wasn't planning on getting involved until November, but as soon as they see us, meaning America, drop the atomic bomb in Japan, Russia immediately declares war on Japan. The reason that is because Russia wants to quickly race in here, because since they're legally helping out America, and America's like, no, back off Russia now, we don't need you anymore. They want to race in here to Asia and take over these countries that Japan had taken over during World War II. Now, China's so big, and they're pretty clear. Russia, you're not taking over China. So that was never really a question whether Russia was going to come in and take over China. That just never was a thing. Korea, however, Russia tries to race in from the northern top of Korea so they can take over Korea and make Korea a communist country. America, knowing this is going to happen, races in from the southern part of Korea and races north to try to make it a democracy. Russia and America meet in the middle of Korea and they have a stare down. Uh-oh, what do we do here? So, because still at this point, this is at the very end of World War II, they're still pretending like they're going to be friends, America and Russia. They said, okay, we'll just cut this country in half at the 38th parallel, which is like a line that cuts like directly in half of Korea. So Russia gets to influence the northern part of Korea, called North Korea, and they become communist. The southern part of Korea, South Korea, is under the influence of the United States. They become a democracy. Very quickly, two very different cultures are going to emerge here between North and South Korea. All right? So they become two official different countries, North and South Korea. The North Koreans really like communism. The South Koreans really like a democracy. All right? Because it's kind of thrown their old way of life. Everything got thrown out at World War II. So the goal here, honestly, for North and South Korea, they speak the same language, same culture, they're the same people. They've just been divided in half now with new political systems. They both want to make Korea one country again. That is a whole. However, North Korea wants the whole country to be communist, and South Korea wants the whole country to be a democracy. And nobody really knows how they're going to move forward at this time period. All right. So the question is, what happened to divide the country of Korea? It's supposed to be Korea. What happened to divide Korea in half at the 38th parallel? Like what happened here to initially make it break into two separate countries? We just got to talking about that. So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right. This is going to lead to the Korean War. Let me walk you through this because it's crazy. Let's go back to this right here. So, while Chiang Kai Shek, we're going back to that guy. Remember, that's the guy that was in China that is a nationalist, which isn't necessarily a democracy, but it's non-communist. The guy that doesn't like communism, America's trying to fund him. At this point in this picture, that's what China is. So China is nationalist. It's just a different type of political system. All right? Then you have North Korea, which is communist. Then you have South Korea, which is a democracy. So you have like three different political systems here, and it just is. Like nobody's going to like do anything weird to somebody else because they don't have any friends. Well, then Chiang Kai Shek has to flee China and go to Taiwan. Even though America still acknowledges Chiang Kai Shek as the leader of China, he's not. It's Mao Zedong, and Mao Zedong is communist. So now all of a sudden, China becomes communist. North Korea is communist. They know, even up further above them, Russia is communist. North Korea. Now, North Korea doesn't really talk to anybody about this before they do it. They just said, hey, we got all our buddies around here. Now they're all communists. We're going to take it upon ourselves to invade South Korea. So North Korea, fully expecting they're going to get the support of Russia and China, all of a sudden one day invade South Korea to take it over and make the entire peninsula Korea again and make it communist. This is huge, all right? Because now Remember, the entire goal of the United States is containment. You can't let communism spread. That is the Truman Doctrine. Can't let it spread. Now you have a communist country invading a democracy. And America's like, oh, no, you don't. But before America can race into war, shucks, there's a problem. There's a new sheriff in town, I guess you could say, the United Nations. You got to go talk it out now before you can just go jump into war. So America shows up at the United Nations and says, North Korea just invaded a country that was not trying to pick a fight. The United Nations needs to step in here. Well, the United Nations says, go to the UN Security Council and see what they say. The only way you can declare war, meaning the entire world declares war on North Korea, is if it's a unanimous vote in the UN Security Council. So refresher here, here's who's on the UN Security Council. All right. These 5 countries, it has to be unanimous. A single no vote, all right, will stop this from happening. So the United States wants to declare war on North Korea. So United States, yes. England, obviously going to do whatever America says yes. France, they're going to do whatever America and England tell them to do. Yes, so yes. All right, hooray. China. Now, is China going to vote to declare war on a communist country right after they became communist? Now, I've said it enough times, you're probably thinking, no, they're going to vote no and it's going to be over and done with. Refresher real quick. So, China, all right, what are they? Well, they're communist, Mr. Wagstaff. You've been saying that. You're correct. Mao Zedong, here in China, he is communist. However, Chiang Kai Shek? Chiang Kai Shek here, he is not communist. America allows Chiang Kai Shek to be the one that casts the vote, all right, at the UN Security Council, and therefore China votes yes. Big old thumbs up. Let's declare war on those communists. Because Chiang Kai Shek, the guy's not even allowed in the country, is allowed to cast a vote. So it is 4-0. But you know who else has to vote? Russia. Now you're like, well, obviously Russia is going to vote no to declare war on the communist country. So apparently Russia, because they're communists, don't really understand how votes work. They are so angry. Russia is so angry that Chiang Kai Shek is allowed to have the vote for China and not Mao Zedong. And let's be honest, rightfully so. That's shocking that Mao Zedong doesn't have the vote. But Chiang Kai Shek gets the vote. Russia is so angry, to show their displeasure, they boycott this vote. This is an actual photograph of them voting for the whole world to go to war, and Russia's not there. Russia doesn't show up to protest this. Well, Russia doesn't have a vote. It ends up being 4-0, which without a single no vote is counted as unanimous. Because Russia doesn't show up, the entire world declares war on North Korea. Now, before we get into talking about that, because it does not turn out the way you think it would, let's talk about this question here. Explain why Chiang Kai Shek's vote was so upsetting to Russia, and who Russia thought should have gotten that vote and why. So pause me, explain that completely, and we're moving on. All right. So as soon as this war starts, all right, and I got a little map here on the left because it changes very quickly here. North Korea invades South Korea. When that happens, the United Nations, because Russia doesn't cast a no vote, declares war on North Korea. So the entire world declared war on North Korea. Now, something odd happens here that America, to present day, it shocked us when this happened here, but it set the precedent, and it's something that America has to deal with. And so America kind of has the right to be a little grumpy about this. Because America, we've been like, we're the greatest military, and we've said it so much. Once you join the United Nations, everybody's like, all right, America's got the best military. So as soon as it's like, all right, the whole world declares war, everybody just stops and looks at America. Go get them, America. America's like, what? And they're like, yeah, you go do your thing. The United Nations doesn't pay for the military. They just give you the okay. So America's like, okay. So while it's the United Nations declaring war on them, it's usually America and like some support groups from other countries. Everybody gives some, but America does the vast majority of it. So you're still like, all right, America just won World War II. Whoo, go time. Don't work out well. Almost immediately, North Korea beats the living bejesus out of South Korea and almost conquers it. And the reason is, and I have this wrecked airplane here, because when it's go time, America's like, let's do it. So America hasn't been making planes or bombs or jeeps or anything since the end of World War II. So it's been 5-6 years since anything's been made. So they go get the World War II equipment. If you've ever had a vehicle, all right, especially one that was built in the 1940s, that sat in a garage for 5 years and had never been cranked, and then you have to go like race it. That is basically what happens here, and none of our equipment works. It's like there are tons of planes crash, everything falls apart. We're not on the same page, and with the idea that the whole world would show up on North Korea and stomp a hole in them is not what happens. North Korea effectively just beats the snot out of the UN forces, pushes them all the way back to this little part of South Korea called Busan, and everybody's like, what are we going to do? Now imagine there's a conversation between some American generals, and they're like, hey, Billy, think we need to go call him? Joey, come on, man. You know he's a jerk. Yeah, Billy, but he probably fixes. Yeah, but he'll show up and cuss us and make us feel bad, but I don't want to call him. We're about to lose this war if we don't call him. Fine, go call the mean guy. So the mean guy is old Douglas MacArthur. So Douglas MacArthur, this is the guy that was in charge of the island hopping campaign in World War II. A grumpy grandpa, very good military general, mean guy, very grumpy, but he's a good leader. He'd been hanging out in Japan. He literally wrote Japan's constitution for them after war. America drops nukes on Japan, and then the head general of the region shows up, Douglas MacArthur, and writes the Japanese constitution for Japan. It is still in effect today, and it's called the MacArthur Constitution. So, dude's a jerk. And we're going to talk some of his jerk moves today. But he's also very competent and is good. So this is why they're like, oh, he's going to be mean. So they say, hey, MacArthur, can you come down to can you come down here to Korea and help us out? And he's like, oh, I got to do everything around here. So MacArthur shows up, and this is a picture of him smoking a pipe with the Korean flag in it because he's, I don't know, he's going to wreck shop. So MacArthur comes in. It's a really cool story. He basically says, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to invade here in Incheon, which military strategy seems like a really dumb thing to do to land that far behind enemy lines. He's like, just stop questioning me and do it. Huge success when MacArthur shows up and comes up with a new game plan. Pretty much eradicates the North Korean army. All right. And then once they've wiped out the North Korean army in South Korea, they're like, hey, we could just go right into North Korea, take over North Korea, and make North Korea and South Korea join them again, but now they're going to be an all-democracy. So this is what MacArthur does. After he secures South Korea, he races into North Korea. This is in a matter of like a year. Massive change. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is going to be huge. Well, if you look on this map, at the top of Korea is a river called the Yalu River. On the other side of that river is China. Now, even though China voted to go to war, it was really Chiang Kai Shek, not the actual Chinese people or the Chinese leadership. Mao Zedong does not want North Korea to stop being a communist country because then he's getting encroached with a democracy. So what Mao Zedong does is he invades North Korea with Chinese troops that come across the Yalu River. And at this point in the war, it is American troops fighting Chinese troops in North Korea. So MacArthur's response to this, the president is Harry Truman. He says, "Hey, Truman, let's nuke China." Like, MacArthur straight up wants to drop a nuclear bomb on China. Like, we have it, let's use it. And to MacArthur, this seems like a completely normal thing to do. The president of the United States at the time, Truman's like, no, we're not nuking China. We're not nuking a communist country. First off, we're not nuking anybody. Like, what are you talking about? And Douglas MacArthur's response to being told no is he starts calling Truman a coward in the newspaper. Here's the work relationship between these two men. Truman is the boss. MacArthur is your worker. MacArthur can't call your boss a coward in worldwide media and expect not to have consequences. So when Truman tells MacArthur he can't nuke China, and MacArthur calls Truman a coward in worldwide media during the middle of a war, Truman has no other option but to fire MacArthur, all right? So this dude that was in charge of the island hopping campaign wrote the Japan's constitution. He basically brought America right to the brink of success here in Korea. Immediately is fired, all right? Just kicked out of the military. You're done, all right? This is a picture here of Truman. He's not telling him you're fired here, but these are these two men talking. Truman's the one that with his hand on MacArthur's arm. So MacArthur is fired. Well, MacArthur's kind of the brains behind this whole offensive. So as soon as MacArthur leaves, the North Koreans basically re-secure Korea, and they push all the way back down to the 38th parallel with the help of the Chinese, and then they agree to stop fighting. They didn't sign a treaty. They didn't end the war. Once they got back down to the 38th parallel, they're like, I'll stop shooting if you stop shooting. And North and South Korea stopped shooting at each other. It's a ceasefire. It's a truce. Not a treaty. All right? A war doesn't end until there's an actual treaty. But at the end of this war, what has changed? Nothing. It was divided at the 38th parallel before. It's divided at the 38th parallel afterwards. The reason, and up to present day, there is no treaty that officially ended this war is both sides want the same thing. North and South Korea both want a united Korea. The problem is the South wants it to be all democracy and the North wants it to be all communist. And neither side is willing to change that over time. North Korea, as we head for the next 50, 60, 70 years up to present day, North Korea really has struggled in a lot of ways. They've kind of gotten pretty crazy. South Korea, basically, it's like America, but they speak Korean. So present day, South Korea has a Samsung, Kia, Hyundai. All of those companies are from South Korea. North Korea is starving to death. But it's more geopolitical politics as we get further. But at the time, they're relatively the same. They're both kind of getting started in their own political systems. But neither side is willing to give up their political system in order to unite themselves, even though they both desperately want to just have one Korea again. So the question here is, the Korean War, as of 2021, has never officially ended, even though both sides want the same thing. Explain why a compromise can't be reached, even though both sides want the same thing. So we just got done talking about that. Answer that completely. See you guys tomorrow.